how to avoid a scope creep in your project. My name is Guilherme, and I'm a project management expert. I help professionals and companies to build up their project management skills, to develop their project management skills. How do I do that? Can go in several different ways, from providing training, helping them to build knowledge, from providing consulting, one-on-one mentoring, one-on-one coaching, and of course, hopefully creating value for them in form of content. Before I start, make sure you like and share this video here so it can reach more people and more people can learn about project management and how to properly manage their scopes in their project. The topic I'm going to talk about today is one very famous topic in project management. It's called, of course, scope management. You might have heard that, and of course, scope creep. What's interesting on that this is of course a topic that pop up quite often, and usually I get some questions about this one, and that's of course why I create this content. So let me first of all explain what's scope creep. Scope creep, the definition of it, it's like uncontrolled change in a project, meaning that there's a change, maybe a designer, maybe a coder or a dev, someone implemented something in the project without without going through a change management process. So the first thing that you need to have in mind that a change, the way to avoid a scope creep is having a change in management process there. That being said, well, because every time I talk about change management, some people thinking about something that needs to be very big. No, the change management process that does need to be. It does not. It doesn't need to be that big or complex or full of approval or bureaucracy, but it needs to be there. Every project should have a change management process. That regardless if you're using waterfall, if you're using agile, and so on. What's a change management process? What you're going to do in a change management process? You're going to think through, okay, what's the proposed change? How does it affect the product? How does it affect like our supply chain? How does it affect manufacturability? How does it affect execution? How does it affect quality? How does it affect customer? And then, of course, with the project team, you can think those things through. And of course, I've already mentioned it does not be something very complex. For example, one of the companies I've worked in the past, when I started there, they had no change management process at all. So I would see in other projects what happened. The customer would request something, people would just change it, and they would keep going on that one. And of course, one of the things that I did in this occasion, and I talked with my lead designer there, and of course with other important stakeholders like procurement, the account manager, process engineer, quality, and say, hey, we need to have to establish a change management process. I don't want to create something crazy like some organizations you have a change management process going through a formal system like a PLM, product like cycle management software, where it's required formal approvals and so on. In this case, there was nothing in place. So what I talk with my team members, I say, we need to track these, and then we get together once a month to say, okay, what's changing in the process? What's changing in a project? How do we register? How do we are going to manage this? How we are going to tackle this? So it can be very simple, and of course, based on that discussion with the team, we defined what were the appropriate actions to follow up. Something also that's very important for you to understand. You are going to see changes in any type of project. Why? Because you can have a waterfall project with all full specification in the beginning, but life will happen and something that we are going to need to adapt. Of course, I cannot tell you if what is going to be the level of change that you have there, but you are going to face a type of thing change that you need to adapt. Maybe it's a change on the scope, or maybe something that you need to adapt with your team, how you communicate it with your timeline, but changes are going to be there. Of course, depending on the change, you don't need to go for a change management process. And a change management process makes sense when you're talking about scope, when you are talking about important items in the timeline. But if it's a change for a task, for a deadline in a task, of course, you don't need to go for a change management process. So it's very important that you, as a project manager, you have this kind of common sense to align these things there. So if you have an uncontrolled change, it's a scope creep that can happen in any type of project, even if you're using Scrum. You should have a change management process. For example, if you're using Scrum, what's a common change management process? If you want to change a specific feature or something like that, you suggest something for the product owner to add something in the product backlog. Then it's going to be prioritized, and then the product owner will define if he or she will add this in the product backlog or not, and what kind of priority that activity might have there. So a change management process is always required. So you are going to avoid scope creep if you create a change management process, which can be very simple as the one I just mentioned. You get together with your team, you assess the things of changing. For example, in this case, what we did, the lead designer he mentioned, oh, we had to change here this type of material, here in your product because the customer requested us to be able to operate in a higher temperature there or to withstand higher pressures there, and all those types of things. And of course, you could implement, or the customer requested us to create a Pokayoke feature. A Pokayoke feature is basically something that you add in your product to make sure that the product can only be assembled in a specific position. A very common way to understand that it's your SIM card from your cell phone. Usually a SIM card it has like a cut in one of the corners, and you can only place these in your cell phone in only one position. That's a very common way. That's a Pokayoke feature. That's added there to make sure that you can only put your cell phone chip in the right way in your phone. So a Pokayoke feature can also the customer request that can also it's going to change the design, how it's affected the design depending on the situation. But it's very important that you understand those things. And so in those meetings we discuss, oh, the customer wants that. That's fine. So let's bring this commercial discussion also to the customer. So that's very important that you do it. Other part of that you can see when you are dealing with scope, what's called gold plating. Gold plating, in general, means that you are going to add some extra features or delivering something more that's not originally agreed on. This is mainly considered a bad practice in project management if you look for the PMI or for the Prince 2. Why? Because if you are doing something that was not requested by your customer or by your stakeholders there, first you are introducing additional risk for the project. Mainly if it's an uncontrolled change, you might end up having very weird situations there. For example, a very famous case from scope creep there. There, I think it was a building in China that they were I think they were building the structure of the building there, and at some point someone decided to say, okay, let's build 5 additional floors there because the structural calculation is already considering that. Nice, so we can make a taller building there. Everything was beautiful, but because they did not have a good change management process there, someone forgets that they would need to also to increase the lift there. So the lift, if it's 10 floor building, the lift would end in the 10th floor, and everybody would have to go via stairs to the 15th floor. That's kind of change that you don't want in your project there. So gold plating, talking about a bit gold plating, it's delivering more the customer wants. A lot of times people think, okay, but that's something good. Not necessarily, because as I already mentioned, it can introduce additional risk, can bring more cost, can bring more timeline. And in a lot of the situations, you do not understand if the customer wants to pay for that. So what means you are taking more risk, you're consuming resources from the organization, and you really don't even know if there's any kind of extra value that you are delivering there. That's why gold plating is considered a bad project management practice there. Every time, if you create this change management process there, what should you consider there while assessing your project? So here, a very easy guide that you can follow. I've already mentioned these kind of things, but you need to think, okay, this type of change, how does it affect the design from what I'm doing there? If it's a construction, if it's a physical product, if it's a software and architecture there, whatever, how does it affect the design there? How does it affect execution or manufacturing? For example, depending if you change, if you have a manufacturing line, if you change the format of the component, that might affect the tools in the manufacturing line. So there's an impact there. Depending how you change the product, that might affect the quality. For example, you change the material, that might be that the material is not good for heating, or that might be the material is not good for cold, or for any type of situation there. So you need to understand how this change affect quality of what you're doing there. Does it impact the supply chain? For example, again, if you are changing something in your product, might affect one of the components that you need to order from a different supplier. How this is going to affect it? Of course, it's going to. It can be. It can be a lot of. You can find a lot of variance there, but it's very important that you understand the dimensions of those things, and of course, cost and time. How changes they affect cost and time? Here's something very important because I've seen organizations that they don't have any change management process. And I've seen one project that was kind of an absurd, at least in my perspective, of course, because the project management maturity in this organization was very low. So they had a customer at the time. The customer hired a company to develop a product, and the customer was continually requesting changes even though after the product was already in mass production or was already in serial production, the customer would continue to request changes. And for some reason, the project manager, and of course, the project manager in this case was just a person that was doing something, and something said, "Oh, you're going to coordinate," and he did not have any type of project management training, and he started to implement those changes. So, but to implement those changes, he would request stuff from the design team. The design team would work, so that needs to be qualified again. There was some tests to make sure that the changes are working properly. There were changes in the supplier. There was a like phase in, phase out to be planned in the manufacturing line, all those types of changes, and no one ever thought that say, hey, we need to ask money for the customer there. We need to say, hey, dear customer, you need to pay for part of this change because we cannot go like that. And in this situation, this project and the company was doing that, I believe, for already 4 or 5 years. So they were never able to close the project and to have a handover to production. They were keep running those changes, and the customer would always come back and asking something better. And of course, you might already guess the business case for the project sucked because the budget was way already over. And of course, if you keep running changes for 5 years and that those are no pay, non-paid changes for a customer, you're going to end up having trouble with your business case. So an important thing that you need to think about in this change management process is the customer willing to pay for the change? Sometimes you have, of course, a specification, and if it's a change that, okay, the customer specified that somewhere, we just miss it, then you need to implement it. But if it's a change that's not required before, that was not part of a specification, it's fair that the company goes and asks the customer, hey, dear customer, nice that you want this change, but that will cost us this amount of money here. Are you willing to pay for that? And to implement that, that will cost us, I don't know, another 3 months, another 5 months, another 6 months, depending on the type of change. It can be even 1 year. And you are going to find out that a lot of the times the customer will say no. Because what happens when you are dealing in a project, a lot of people, they have ideas, and a lot of them can be very good ideas. What happens is sometimes a good idea, even though it seems nice, if you say, okay, if you would have done that at first, in the beginning of the project, that would be very nice. So for the next one, that you can do that. But for this project here, the amount of money that you need to invest for the change does not pay off the benefit that you get later on. So the next question is, you need to understand what's the benefit of the change. For example, one type of the change that I had to implement in my project, one of the I was dealing in automotive business here with one of the big European OEMs, and then we agreed on a type of packaging for the product to ship for to the customer factory there. But when they got there, the customer say, okay, this package does not attend my needs. I cannot work with this type of package. It was several different reasons how they would pick the material in the assembly line and so on. And then of course, then they asked us, the customer asked me, and the company say, we need to change this package. One of the first thing and one of the first discussions that we had there was the process engineer saying, yeah, but the customer already approved that. We already order material, we have material in stock. But in this case, what was my first reaction? Because the feedback from the customer was clear. We cannot work with this type of package. What I told my team in the occasion, say, I do understand what you're saying. I do understand that customer already approve on that. But what they're telling us that it must change. Otherwise, they cannot work with this type of box or the way this is packaged in serial production, in mass production. So that means that if they cannot produce this in mass, they are not going to buy for us. So that kills the entire project there. Of course, that was something that the customer would have to add in all the cars. So we would need to find a way. But that was a case saying you must change because there's a benefit there, or there's an issue there if you do not change. So we decided to change, and of course we assess what was the cost and time impact, and we discuss this with the customer. Say, dear customer, we already have packages on stock. If you want to change it, we need to replace the stock that we have. That will take this amount of time, and of course there's a cost. Then you enter another type of discussion that can be a claim discussion or additional order, depending on the timing that you are going to do that. But that's something that the customer, they say we must do that. There's no way around it. So that's also very important because when you ask those kind of questions, if the customer is willing to pay it and what's the benefit of the customer, you kind of start to understand what's the priority of the change. Because if it's something that must happen, you need to see the benefit, or if say, okay, if this change is not implemented, the product will not work. So you kind of does not have option, even though the change impact can be quite big. Say, yeah, but we cannot work like that. So depending on the situation, you can see that like if you are in a construction project, for example, then something went wrong in the design, or there are some of those specifications change, and someone decided in the case of the building to make a building a bit taller there. Well, it might as well be that you need to change the infrastructure of the project. You say, but the yeah, hypothetical situation, the entire design is already ready. Well, but there's no way around. You cannot use the design that you have if you have a taller building there. Those are basic things that a project management must understand. And that's why I say that very important that you need to create your change management process. And your change management process can be something, if the organization does not have anything, because I've seen organizations that they define a change management process. For example, they say you need to go for the change board, and they put a lot of very nice definitions as you find, for example, in the PMBOK. And then I read the procedure, and then I asked, okay, who is the change board? And then nobody knew it because someone think, okay, I'm going to copy what I see there as a good practice or as I see other companies doing. But that's where they stop it. They never trying to implement this in practice. So you're going to face this kind of challenge also. Other type of challenge that you can face in a change management procedure there. For example, in the organization and that one of the organizations that I've worked on, I started with a project, and then suddenly the account manager he comes to me and says, I hope you are tracking out the change in the project because we need to try if the customer is asking for extra stuff, we need to charge the customer and so on. And okay, very standard procedure. And then I look into the eyes of the account manager. I just ask, okay, I do agree, I understand that, but what's my baseline here? And he starts to look to me and say, okay, huh? I want you to track the changes. And I say, yes. What's the idea? What's the concept of a change? I'm changing from something to something. So I always need to have something to compare. And he keep looking at me and say, okay, what's our baseline here? What's the original specification or the original request we get to the customer, where we are going to measure to understand what we are changing to be able also to track something to change to the customer. And then the account manager, he was looking at me. He never thought on that one. After requesting a few times, we kind of gave up because this person, this is like the type of thing that people they read somewhere, they think it's nice, but they've never done it in practice. So you end up in a situation like that. So what I did in this situation, I was also try to be very simple. Say, okay, we don't have a baseline here. I talk with the lead design. We need to find something that we can refer to, something that also we can refer to a documentation with the customer. Because it is also not clear to the customer what's the baseline, you're going to find a lot of trouble on asking for a change, asking money for a change, because the customer says, my specification is here, I've never changed anything. But the specification was not never fully clear there. And that might seem an example that to say, okay, that's obvious, but I can tell you it's not. I've worked in more than one project that I end up in that situation. That I asked to the commercial team, okay, what are the customer specifications? And they did not. They provided a price to the customer, but they did not properly reference those prices, in specifications, assumptions, drawings, or anything else. So it's kind of an open box to discuss with the customer. For example, to give a very simple example here, if you say you have a concrete structure, that in this case was infrastructure for transmission distribution, you have a concrete structure of, I don't know, 10 meters. And for some reason, the customer asks some changes, and this needs to be a 15 meters. Here I'm just putting any number there to make clear in the example. How you're going to tell that you consider 10 meters in the beginning? Because if there's nothing registered, if you don't have any traceability regarding your baseline, the customer might as well say to you, well, in the beginning, you already should have assumed the 15 meters. And you say that you comply with all my specs. In my specs, if you do the right calculation, you should end up with the 15 meters. So you end up having endless discussions. That's why a good to have a good change management process, you also need to have a good baseline process. Does it mean because you're going to set a baseline is not going to change it? Of course not. Does it mean that if a customer asks you to change, you're not going to change it? No, but you need to have this clear because there's also I've worked with customers that they would like to change a lot of stuff, but they were not willing to pay for that. What's the problem with that? If you implement a lot of change, in this case we are talking about a type of infrastructure project construction. A lot of change means cost. If you change type of material, if you increase the amount of service to be executed, that means cost. And someone needs to pay for the cost. If the customer is not paying for that, the company that you're working on will pay for that. What does it mean? You're killing the project business case. The company is there to make a profit. If the company is not profitable, then everybody will have a problem with that. Of course, if you're working, for example, in an agile environment, if you're working with Scrum, you need to have the right type of contract that also will support this type of change. What do I mean by that? If you have a fixed price contract, every change will go from your profit margin there. If you have a different type of contract where the customer is also open to pay for that, so the customer is open to have a relationship and a partnership for that, those changes can be worked out in a very different ways. Because okay, it costs you more hour, but the customer pays you per hour anyway, so it's not a problem. You just need to align with the customer. Okay, to execute this, I will need the time, or to execute these extra features here, we are going to do that in the next, I don't know, 3 or 4 sprints. You can discuss it, what kind of prioritization you are going to have in this, but those are different situations. And here again, you see that in both scenarios, you see that change management process is required there. Of course, the change management process might have different implications depending if you are working with your waterfall, depending if you are working with Scrum, depending on the type of contract that you have with your customers, depending on the kind of relationship you might have with your stakeholders there. I've seen in companies some stakeholders that they are going to say, I don't want to change anything in the timeline. They want a fixed date and they don't want to compromise in the scope. That will create challenges for you in the case of change. Why? Because if you are changing, that invariably means that you're going to have a cost and you're going to have a time impact. If this time impact will affect the critical path and will affect the final delivery, that's a different discussion. But there's always, even the smallest change will request someone to do something, even if it's a couple of hours of work. That should not be a big deal, but there's always a cost involved with that. Of course, if you're working with a customer in a big project and they ask you to change for you, but that's outside of your scope, but that's something that's simple, you can even think, okay, I'm going to do that just to keep my relationship with the customer. That's always how it works. Uh, you execute some type of stuff, but you need to be aware. You need to have this change management process to understand, because what I've seen also happening, people say I'm going to please the customer, so I'm going to execute the change that they're doing there, but they do not fully assess what is going to be the impact of the change. And when they start to execute it, then they are already committed with something with the customer, and then the kind of the impact or the actions to fully implement this change start to unfold. And then when they start to see all those things, they start to see the amount of work to be executed there is much, much higher than initially expected there. And of course, what's going to happen? You're going to have problems again, because now you're already committed to execute something to the customer. And depending on the situation, if you say that you're going to do it for free, then all kinds of discussions that you are going to end up having there, because it was not properly aligned up front. And you agreed with a change without having a fully understanding on what's the impact of the change. That's why I'm giving you those tips here to understand those dimensions. And you might ask, okay, there's something else. Probably there's something else. This is an extensive list and there's nothing else. No, but this is a way to help you to start to think about it. Might be that you have a customer commitment, might be here that you have an impact in some other areas in the organization, that you might have impact in your resources, might be an extra change that's going to be an extra load that you cannot take it at the moment. So keep in mind of those things. More dimensions as you can think of. And again, it does not need to be complicated. It does not need to take, and it should not take like 6 months to assess a change. Of course, I do understand that depending on what they're asking for, a change can be quite impactful, and you need a couple of weeks to fully grasp on that, on the type of change that's being requested there. But if it's a change and you need 6 months, 1 year to assess it, something is wrong. And depending on the type of contract that you're going to have with your customer, you always want to align upfront to execute something. And some customers, they are going to say, I want you to do it, but don't want to pay for that. And at some point, you can say, okay, I understand. You can try to find a middle ground right there just to keep a relationship with the customer. Sometimes you're going to say, okay, if you don't pay, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Or if you say that costs 1 extra year to execute that, then you need to pay for that, or you need to compromise that deliverable that we have. This is very important here. And how you're going to manage this, how you're going to assess this. The only way that you are going to assess, so a good change management process, that's something that you're going to be executed often. So it needs to be reviewed. You need to review your scope often to see which direction the project is going, what's new, what's not new, what happened, what did not happen, to understand what type of change that you're going to need there. And not only the customer, some change, I've already mentioned that some types of change you need to execute it. For example, if you're doing, let's put an example. I think I think it was Samsung a few years ago that had a cell phone that while charging would could blow. The cell phone would blow, would pop. Well, they had to change something to implement that. So that there was not a discussion. Okay, if we don't do that because it was quality, it's safety, so you need to do it right away. But it's important that you assess it to make sure that also when you are trying to change it to solve a problem, you solve the problem because if you don't have the clarity, you're going to end up having problems. So important things that I you need to understand right now. First, when you're talking about a change management process, you need to talk about change from to. So you always need to have something to compare. What's called a baseline. That's your scope baseline that you're going to compare. Even though if you say I have a scope that can change because I'm using Scrum, it's also important that you have something as a reference. Otherwise, you cannot change it. You say I'm changing. Okay, you are changing from what to what. So if there's nothing, you're defining something. So it's a bit different from a change. Second thing that you need to that I hope you understand by now. What's the scope creep? Scope creep it's uncontrolled change. So what you want? You want to have a process management, change management process. This change management process can be simple. It should not take 6 months. It does not need to be very bureaucratical there. But it's important that you have this discussed with your team and you check the main important items there to understand with your team there, including design, execution, manufacturing, quality, supply chain, cost, and time. What's the impact in the customer? If the customer is willing to pay for that, if what's the impact in anything committed with the customer. Those type of things they're very important in a change management process. And depending on the type of change, you can discuss those things if you are working with your team in few minutes that can be solved and you agreeing a way forward for that. Every time you talk about change, there's also something that's important for you to understand that I hope you understand. That's gold plating. So because there's people always with this mindset, I'm going to do more than is requested for me. That's good for my customer. Not necessarily, not always. So if you are doing something there and if you are doing extra and the customer does not see the value there, that's called gold plating. That's usually a waste. That's also nice to think about the lean management definition of waste that the customer is changing that the customer also needs to be willing for pay for that and the customer needs to see the value on that one and of course the customer can be an internal and external customer. So this is the idea that you need to have about scope creep and change management there. If you have questions, feel free to write it down here, or you can also go in the Q&A box that is open every day in my Instagram, and you can ask as many questions as you want there. Again, don't forget to like and share this video here so it can reach more people and more people can learn project management. Don't forget to follow me for more content. Every week there's more content. I share daily content on Instagram. There and on Instagram there's also a Q&A box there. You can ask more questions. It's very important, and of course, if you do not understand, you reach out because that's the better way that I can help you. Because if it's your goal is to develop your project management skills, my goal is to support you in that journey. Thank you and see you soon. Bye.